Yeah, thank you, Michael, good afternoon. So my colleague John Weimer spoke a little earlier about some of the programs that NETL oversees is involved with, and what I'm going to talk about is something a little more specific technology-wise. First, though, before I get into that, a couple of extra factoids, I guess, about NETL, if you're not already familiar. We're one of the DOE fossil or national laboratories. Our focus is fossil energy. Different than some of the other national labs, we are government-owned and government-operated. We typically look at anything from upstream resource production, oil, gas, coal, all the way down through the downstream and final end-use application, be that power, electricity, fuels, and chemicals. We are a full-spectrum laboratory, meaning that we look at everything from on the discovery end of things all the way through the development and delivery, and then up through the major demonstration stage, in which we typically hand things over to industry. NETL has a range of capability there in terms of the research that we conduct. About 20% of our funding is done with actual R&D on site. The other 80+% is executed through project management to other entities like other national laboratories, universities, and private sector contractors. And so we have quite a mix, and so partnerships is a very important thing for NETL, as it is the other national laboratories as well. So as we move through the discovery stage all the way through deployment, even though we typically look at TRL levels, say 3, 4, up through 5 or 6, oftentimes we have to reach a little further down, more on the atomic scale, I would say, to try to develop enough understanding to allow us to understand better how we may have to develop a technology. And through all of those scales, we try to employ some sort of ability and component to model those, not only to help us in guiding the research itself and maybe utilized later for scale-up activities and more usefulness for the private sector, but also just as a place that we can actually record knowledge. So if we're able to model something, validate that at the various scales, it helps really demonstrate and build our knowledge base for science and the R&D. As John mentioned some of the statistics, I mean, we've got roughly 1,000 R&D projects across the 50 states, 1,200 employees located at 5 national laboratories, and let me show you a location map for that. So even though we are one virtual national laboratory, we have 3 predominant centers where the R&D is conducted on site in Morgantown, West Virginia, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Albany, Oregon. We have 2 field offices, one in Alaska and a field office in Texas. But we are all one virtual laboratory. Now, each one of the sites over time has developed its own capability, I would say, or expertise, and we're very diligent about trying not to duplicate those kinds of capabilities across our sites. It's something that we've been able to do really well, and I think there's very good synergy in the way that it's been organized. Core competencies that we employ here, computational science and engineering is kind of as it sounds. Materials engineering and manufacturing, structural materials, extreme condition, metal alloys, refractories, more functional materials such as catalysts that we can fabricate and assemble and study down at the atomic level. In the geological and environmental systems area, that's really everything subsurface. So think about reservoir modeling, characterization, looking at the gas and oil and coal, groundwater monitoring issues, carbon dioxide sequestration, effects in the subterranean areas. And so think about anything underground. This is kind of where we capture those types of competencies. Energy conversion engineering is where I sit. And so once we move something from a discovery stage or chemistry or a concept, we need to move it into a performance environment. So think about devices, reactors, integrated systems. Systems engineering and analysis, that's where we conduct a lot of our systems analysis studies, be it techno-economic studies, life cycle assessment studies, to help guide our programs and make decisions on some of the research concepts that are involved. through the research arena. And then program execution and integration. So NETL has a very long and strong history in project management and procurement in the federal system. And again, about 80% of our budget is executed through those external projects and agreements. Okay, on to the topic here, changing the conversion paradigm. So for decades, thousands of years, maybe back to caveman days, we have been heating things with thermal energy, increasing the temperature to the point of combustion. A lot of combustion science and combustion technologies and industry out there, it's served us very well, but we're starting to get to a point where we're now looking at tenths of an efficiency point increase in technology advancements. So is there an opportunity to change that? Is there an opportunity to take a leap forward in terms of efficiency gains? Where this really starts to kind of play out is if you want to get any kind of reasonable kinetics, conversion times, typically you have to drive the temperature up to overcome those activation energies. And you can play some games with catalysts and help lower those temperatures, but you're still talking about pretty extreme temperatures. And the shortcoming, I would say here, or maybe it's the opportunity, is that as you increase that temperature, that's more energy into the system or into the process. Thermal systems such as turbines and technologies like that really like the high temperature and can have high efficiencies. But when you talk about chemical conversion into other products, other fuels, typically those equilibrium kinetics for those are at much, much lower temperatures. Higher productions are at those lower temperatures, and as you increase that temperature in a system, you get much lower product conversion. And so how do you meet that dichotomy? So if I think about the rest of the electromagnetic spectrum, is there an opportunity to maybe exploit something in there to be able to affect chemical reaction? So think about plasmas, lasers, microwaves, and microwave ends up being the topic that I want to cover today. So a little microwave 101. Microwave frequency range is typically between 0.3 gigahertz and 300 gigahertz. And so it's a fairly long wave, about a meter down to 1 millimeter in length. Typically, it's at about 2.45 gigahertz. That's your microwave ovens in your kitchens, and that's largely an FDA kind of regulated thing. But if you look at the microwave itself, there are a couple components to that. You've got an electric field and a magnetic field. And those particular properties allow us to look at how we may affect chemical conversion energetics. Certain materials have various abilities to absorb microwave energy, and that depends on things like dielectric property and the frequency of the microwave, temperature itself of the material, is that dielectric capacity changes throughout the temperature range. And so is there a way that we can exploit that to be able to drive some of this lower temperature, lower energy conversion? Some examples of some materials and their interaction with microwaves. Gases and glass materials are typically transparent, pass on through, very little absorption. Polymers and resins are very absorptive, and in fact, in the industrial world, the production of polymers utilize microwaves very significantly, but it's very much a thermal effect in those cases. Some coal and catalyst systems are very absorptive to microwaves, and metals, of course, are reflective to microwave energy. So overcoming thermal equilibrium. You'll see a couple of plots here, and these are literature-derived research over the last 10 plus years. The one on the left is by Stigman et al. And what they found was if you look at the Boudouard reaction, where you're converting coal and CO2 into carbon monoxide, this particular graph kind of makes me dizzy, so let me see if I can't simplify that without using a cursor here. If you look on the far left of that graph, you'll see the word microwave, and let's just focus on the production of CO. CO starts being produced at around 200 degrees C under the influence of microwave energy. As we go up through about 400 to 700 degrees C, you'll see there's a very significant production and almost complete conversion to the product CO that we're looking for. Now, if you look out to the right at the word thermal, you'll see a yellow line crossing through the middle of the word thermal, and that's the CO line associated with just thermal energy conversion. If you use only thermal energy, you need to get in the 800 to 1100 degrees centigrade range to drive that conversion. So it's a much more significant higher temperature and energy input that you have to use in thermal systems than it is in microwave systems. A similar thing can be seen on the graph on the right, which is looking at the decomposition of hydrogen sulfide. The lower two lines represent thermal equilibrium conversion, which is data points. The square data points is an actual experiment that was done with thermal energy conversion, which pretty much falls on the thermal equilibrium line, so you get it out to 950 degrees K. If you look above that, though, there's the line for the microwave conversion. And so at any temperature point or equivalent temperature point, you'll see a much, much higher conversion into the product. And so what's going on? There's a lot of talk about microwaves being only a thermally driven event or a thermal event per se. But can there be some energetics benefit to microwave interaction at some other energetic site? Can it impact the electronic structure, for example, of a chemical reaction system? And the jury's still out on a lot of that. But what we are seeing is evidence that there's something much more than a thermal effect occurring with microwaves. And at the end of the day, what you really want to see anyhow is lower energy and higher conversion regardless of the mechanism. And so although we're very much an applications driven kind of laboratory in the way that we look at things, we very much try to capture mechanistic aspects to try to understand how to design these systems more. So we're trying to do a little bit of both here as we explore these different chemistries. So we look at, for example, say a worst case scenario. Let's just pretend that it is a thermal effect. And let's say you have to get a reaction to kick off. It won't light off until 800 degrees centigrade. So let's look at a case where you input thermal energy versus, say, using a microwave to drive that energetic system. In the upper block there, the orange block you see at a temperature of 800 degrees centigrade, we input a thermal energy of 682 kilojoules into that system. Well, it's heating the entire system to that 800 degrees C temperature before reaction can occur. In the lower example, in the blue block, you'll see orange spots throughout that. And that really what that represents is the ability to design a material and pretend that those orange dots are, say, where the reaction occurs. Think about catalysts, small catalyst sites, where if you can get those sites up to 800 degrees centigrade and focus your energetics there by the design of materials, then the rest of the system can be much, much cooler. In this case, we're showing 400 degrees centigrade. So we're able to get the same kind of conversion with a much lower energy input. In this case, it's 473 degrees or 473 kilojoules. Now, some examples that we've conducted here at the lab over the past year plus have been looking at those kind of effects. And the one on the left is a methane to benzene reaction in which we looked at various catalysts, some off the shelf, some that we designed. But in each case, when we employed microwave energetics, we got a much, much higher conversion. The same can be said in the upper right with the cold pyrolysis experiment. And again, all those temperatures were maintained, both thermal and microwave, to the same temperature point. In one case, we just applied microwaves to kind of drive that system and drive those temperatures. And again, you can see that the microwave itself gave much, much more favorable yields of products. The bottom graph is a coal gasification example in which the lower line you can see virtually low or limited conversion of the coal itself when you applied microwave energetics at those same temperature conditions. We got nearly complete conversion in that particular example. And so over the past few years, we've tried to invest a little bit more into our ability to conduct some of the science for this microwave energetic system. We started out with a fixed frequency and fixed power microwave system. which really started to see some very interesting and favorable results. And so we've now brought in a multi-frequency, multi-power microwave reactor to allow us to study frequency aspects. And so that's just now getting in place, so I don't have any results for you on that. But along with that, we're doing very extensive characterization, not only of the materials, but the microwave environment itself, and so that we can kind of better understand kind of the cause and effect of what's going on at at the chemical reaction site. And that's all I have for the microwave talk today, but there's contact information there for NETL, and then I've got my contact information there at the bottom. So if you have any questions or are interested in any of the studies, we are publishing some papers now that should be coming out shortly. I would be happy to share that with you.